So for our very first keynote for Fireside Chat for today, I want to bring on Vitalik, the co-founder of Ethereum and Bitcoin Magazine, to tell you more. And we're going to have a lot of discussions around how things have changed and some things that have not changed. So welcome.
Is it?
I think so.
Okay, good. Mics often don't work. You have to check.
That is actually true. I don't know if people caught that, but that happened with me as soon as I started talking on stage. It's working. All right. Well, there's a lot of things I want to talk to you today about. And for the audience, we're going to shape this conversation in three parts. We're going to reflect on how things kind of started and summarize if things are meeting expectation. We're going to talk about what's next, which is a lot of how do we actually still solve some hard problems that we have in this space, especially around scaling. And then the third category is just various. There's a lot of things I'm curious about. Now, I want to not always talk about Ethereum, and we'll kind of go into some of those things too. And let's get started. So I'll keep it easy for the very first question. And let's go talk about scaling directly. So what even is a rollup?
Okay, so a rollup is a what we call a layer 2 protocol that sits on top of Ethereum. And what it does is it basically creates this environment within which you can do all of the same things that you can do inside of Ethereum, except all of the computation and most of the data is put off-chain, right? But at the same time, the rollup benefits from being protected by the security of Ethereum, right? So you have a system which uses Ethereum only a small amount, just as a space to put proofs and as a space to put a small portion of data that's actually needed to verify the proofs and that's needed to be able to join the rollup. But otherwise, you basically have like an Ethereum-like environment where everything else is being done off-chain. And the benefit of this is that it can be much cheaper than what we call the Ethereum layer 1, while being basically just as secure at the same time.
That was a good intro. Let's dig in a bit deeper. There's a lot of chatter around technicalities around what defines a rollup. You said a lot of things are off-chain and you kind of keep proofs there. So how do you personally define the integrity of what is considered valuable data?
Okay, so this is, I guess, a good time to go into kind of the taxonomy of everything that's not L1 that claims to be part of Ethereum land, whether for marketing reasons or otherwise. Okay, so first you have rollups, right? The key property of a rollup is that even if all of the existing actors in the rollup disappear, any new actors can come in and join, and they can basically keep going. Even if all of the existing actors, except for you as a user inside the rollup, become dishonest, you can still do something that basically possibly with your action or possibly by default, they're not going to be able to win. They're not going to be able to steal your money. They're not going to be able to freeze your money. Basically, you can, as an individual, can force the rollup to still continue acting correctly and continue working the way that it's supposed to work.
And this statement applies for both ZK rollups and optimistic?
And optimistic. Optimistic requires you as that one good user to submit a fraud proof. In a ZK rollup, they're not able to submit invalid stuff in the first place because they can't submit a valid proof. So rollups, and in order to do this, rollups have to put not just the proofs, but also some amount of data on chain, some amount of data per transaction. And the reason they have to do this is so that if all of the existing actors disappear, a new actor who wants to join the rollup and start participating, they can actually kind of, sync the state of the rollup. They can actually understand what happened before, what are the balances that people have, so that they actually have the information to build things on top and keep going. So rollups are the gold standard. Now, within rollups, there is this stage classification between stage 0, stage 1, and stage 2. And actually, L2Beat is if you go to l2beat.com, they have a classification for this. There are a couple of details that I'm still talking about them with. They're current. I personally think the threshold for the upgrade council should be, or for the emergency council should be much higher than it currently is. But otherwise, it's still a very good resource. It's the short definition of the 3 stages is that stage 2 is a fully secured rollup that has all of the properties that I just said. On the other side, a stage 0 rollup is just a thing that is on the path to being a rollup and that has some like very basic stuff. Like there is open source software that lets you like follow along the chain and track what's going on. It calls itself a rollup. It has basic levels of censorship resistance. It's like something that's on the path to being a full rollup, but it's there's still a lot of pieces that have not been developed, but like some pieces that are.
Do sidechains fit that definition, or
sidechains do not, right? So for something to be a stage 0 rollup, it has to have an intent to be a rollup, and it has to already have the data on chain. Stage 1 is like this halfway house where basically you can think of it as the zero knowledge proof or the fraud proof system has half the votes, and there is this security council that has the other half of the votes. And so if there's like a large supermajority on the security council, then they can overturn what the fraud-proof system says. And the purpose of this is to like be some training wheels in case the fraud-proof system still has some bugs, right? But otherwise, like it's basically functioning. It is a roll-up. You just like don't trust the fraud-proof or zero-knowledge proof system quite enough yet, right? And so the requirements are Security Council has to have a minimum of 8 participants. I mean, my view is that the threshold should be at least 3/4, but this is like, one of those things that's being debated. Like, the reason why 50% is not enough, right, is because if you have 50%, then like basically the majority of this council can just push the outcome whatever way it wants, and like there's no value in actually having a proof system, right? So like we're trying to sort of
want supermajority in general,
like push significantly higher on that, and then. Yeah, and like as I mentioned, like L2Beat is doing a good job of kind of like really organizing and like making it available. Like which rollups have which properties. So I personally don't have to like go and yell that out and occasionally make mistakes and occasionally get yelled at people for making mistakes. And then stage 1, basically you can have a security council, needs to have some very high thresholds, needs to include many participants from outside of the organization that's running the thing. And it's kind of this intermediate stage that Arbitrum is at according to some definitions that we've kind of like clarified a lot over the last month or so. And Polygon is like almost there. Like technologically they're there, but practically they just have to like flip some switches, turn off some, like some censorship capabilities and
override checks. Yeah,
right, exactly. So it's like we're basically, we're already in a stage 1 roll-up world, and then stage 2 basically says like we get rid of this security council, or the security council is allowed to exist, but it's only allowed to do things if the code disagrees with itself.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So
it's the actual in case of emergency.
Exactly. So you do fully trust the code, but if you have like two implementations of the code and they disagree with each other, then like that there is a bug and you could have humans intervene, right? But otherwise, like you actually get to something that involves fully trusting the code. And I think we're going to get to stage 2 slowly over the next couple of years.
Next couple of years. So it's. Yeah, is that a check on things being finally safe enough in GA?
Exactly. It's like it's a check where like you're finally safe enough that you're willing to like really throw out the keys and like fully entrust the code.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's stage 2. Now that's rollups, right? Then there's validiums. A validium is a system where you have ZK, you have snarks for validation, you have all those properties, but the data is off chain. The data is somewhere else. And the properties that these systems have is that if the people holding the data turn out, or if the people running the system in general turn out to be evil, they cannot steal your money because they cannot prove a state that did not actually happen, because the ZK snark stopped them from doing that. But what they can do is they can freeze everyone's money, right? Because what they can do is they can just make a block and they can stop publishing stuff. So they can freeze your money, they cannot steal your money. So that's this kind of like hybrid model that the ZK validiums provide. And I think Polygon 1 or 2 days ago made this interesting announcement where they said that they want the current Polygon chain. So they have 2 chains, right? They have Polygon ZK EVM, which is a ZK rollup, and then they have the existing Polygon where most of the existing applications are on. And they made an announcement they want to convert that into a Validium over time, right? And as we've seen, they do have the technology to do that, right? So that's exciting. And then above a Validium, you have various kinds of side chains and things that are run by multisigs and all of that stuff. And those are definitely much less secure, and so I recommend them for, like very low value applications only, but, they do exist.
Amazing. I think all of this actually ends up setting the stage for some of the scaling-related conversations we're going to have later in this talk. Let's kind of zoom out and go back in time. Ethereum is nearing, actually, or maybe just hit 10 years from the initial conception to where we are now. It seems, doesn't seem like 10 years have passed. And my question kind of to you is, walk us kind of down memory lane and tell us about the optimism you had back in the day when you kind of thought about this as a project and what you thought the hopes and dreams were, and the world computer kind of from 10 years ago to where we are now. How did things turn out, and what's kind of some of the reflections you've got?
Yeah, I think like 10 years ago, we just didn't know a lot about what Ethereum could be useful for. And there were definitely some specific applications that I mentioned in the white paper that seemed like it made a lot of sense. Just tokens, exchanging between tokens, DAOs, stable coins, DAOs, privacy-preserving stuff, smart contracts for insurance, like all of this, fun stuff. And then a lot of people have tried those things, and I think over the last 10 years, like, the thinking has really become a lot less abstract and a lot more concrete. Like, there's a lot more focus on specific categories of applications where we know that there is something interesting, and like really trying to take those and trying to, remove all of these annoyances that make them not either not usable or like not actually decentralized or both, and like really try to make those applications work in the best way that we can. So that, like, just tokens are obviously one of them. The whole kind of ENS identity reputation ecosystem is another one. All of the zero knowledge proof stuff, continuing to fine tune and optimize DAOs, like hybrid applications that like have some centralized and some decentralized components, which I think realistically generally end up using zero knowledge proofs, right? So like having much more focused work on getting those kinds of things to a stage where they can actually work, where they like regular people can actually use them. Like, I remember 10 years ago, we had a lot of these movements and subcultures that were really trying to get cryptocurrency adopted for payments. And that was kind of big even in 2013. Like, I remember visiting this region called the Bitcoin Kiez in Berlin. It's the name that they had. Like, they basically renamed Kreuzberg. And they convinced like about 10 shops there, like restaurants and other shops, to start accepting Bitcoin for payments. And there was this really nice subculture around that.
I remember,
Yeah. But then it died off over time because I think one of the big reasons is just the transaction fees made Bitcoin, like no longer good for payments anymore.
Well, the confirmation time, the fees, and then the appreciation made them not make it.
Exactly, like all of that stuff. And look, I think we in Ethereum know that for any of this stuff to be practical, it has to be on layer 2s. But like, there aren't good layer 2 payment systems, right? Like, I have a wallet, you might have a wallet, but what if we have coins on different rollups, right? Like, then like one of us has to go fumble around with Hop protocol or some other weird thing. And, we have to figure out this complicated process of bridging stuff. And like, that's not the way any of this should work, right? Like
waiting in line to pay for your coffee.
Yeah, like paying people should be a one-button experience that, confirms in, 12 seconds. That's the one thing that we did fix. So like EIP 1559 and the merge together, they massively reduced like users' experienced confirmation times. Like for me, they reduced it from like this weird thing that's between 2 minutes and an hour to just like reliably being able to get stuff confirmed in 12 seconds, right? And that's, I think, super amazing. But even still, like once you're talking about cross rollup, then you want one click to be able to like do all of the different steps of the operation, right? And we're not quite at that, and it would be really amazing if we do. And like, I think the nice thing is that like that kind of project is a project that's very hackathon friendly, because like it really is just combining existing systems that exist, right? Like all we need is like a wallet that has where you have an account on multiple L2s, and where if I'm on one L2 and you're accepting on a different L2, then like the system notices that, and the system routes the payments through one of these payments relay, like cross roll-up relaying protocols instead, right? And you need to have like some kind of standardized QR code system so that if like basically whatever information the recipient has about like how they want to be paid, all of that gets scanned by the sender, and then the sender sees not just their address, but like where they want to be paid, what kind of currencies they want to be paid in, and like everything actually combines the different components in the ecosystem. It can actually resolve that. And like this is the sort of thing that's totally implemented. It just has to be done and standardized and like put into the wallets that already exist.
And on the other side for merchants to actually make them easy for them to actually accept it without. And it's an interesting thing because 10 years ago or even like 7 years ago, we could have hypothesized this is how we want it to be, but you didn't have the existing tools. But just in the last 3 years, just USDC itself has become so prevalent and so widespread that you can actually have a notion of, okay, this is $1 anywhere else. But it seems like we're still not there yet in terms of seeing this to full fruition. So those were the initial thinkings on kind of what 10 years ago Ethereum would have been. What kind of is the answer now for what you think Ethereum is now?
I mean, it's I think it's interesting to see kind of, both Ethereum and cryptocurrency in general. Like it's succeeded in some ways and failed in other ways. One of the ways in which it's succeeded is that like significant portions of the population are already using it in lots of countries, right? Like when I go to Argentina...
Using it or have it?
Huh? Both.
Okay.
Like when I go to Argentina, the rate at which I get noticed on the street is like greater than in San Francisco, right? And like lots of people, they hold cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of places that accept it. There's like an entire like actually working economy with it. And then in a lot of these other countries, like I've been told Nigeria is very similar. I've been told Turkey is very similar, and I'll be visiting Turkey for Dev Connect later in the year. There's like lots of places where there's lots of like very real need for this kind of stuff, but you notice one particular thing, which is that when you go there and you see people accepting crypto, they take it through Binance, right? Like look, people just have Binance wallets, and there's a reason for this, right? One is that Binance has zero fees, and Binance accounts are instant, right? Like they just practically solve UX issues that are like prohibitive for a lot of people, right? So I remember my last experience using Ethereum to pay someone for food at a coffee shop, or for coffee, which for me means green tea, at a coffee shop in Buenos Aires. And I made a point of using my like proper Ethereum wallet, and he had a Binance account. And my experience was that I sent the transaction, and then it took a couple of minutes for it to confirm, because even though by this time EIP 1559 existed, the particular wallet that I used had not yet upgraded to support EIP 1559, and now it has, right? So, but the confirmation took a couple of minutes, and then the other thing was that the fee was like, I think somewhere between $1 to $4. I forget the exact amount, but it was like...
How much was the tea?
Well, fortunately, I was paying for like a group of friends, and so I think I think like what actually happened is that we were supposed to pay like somewhere around $15, but then when the payments was like not working, I sent another payment from a different wallet just in case, and then eventually both payments went through, and I'm like, okay, the guy deserves 100% tip, that's fine. But basically, so the fees were like, I think maybe a quarter of the total payment, which is like still, kind of prohibitive, right? So like, I totally understand these people's desire to use Binance, and like, I'm appreciative of Binance and these other wallets for just making crypto available to these people in some form. But at the same time, like the space is about decentralization, and we have to move forward, and we have to make like actually decentralized ways of participating in this ecosystem usable for people. And that's like, to do that, we have to like actually solve these problems, right? And there's been a lot of tech work, but the next step is to like actually do this last mile of making L2s usable, making L2s a default for people, making payments on L2 work, making payments across L2s work, making ENS on L2 with actual Merkle branch verification, the default, making just all of these different pieces actually work together, right?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I had questions on was actually what's missing here. So we'll kind of cover that too. But I think one point that you made is kind of how do we actually contrast convenience with decentralization? So before going to that, I'm actually curious to hear what does decentralization mean to you, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah, and I think like basically building systems where you can't get rug pulled, right? Like that's kind of the
and the thing that you just talked about for all those countries, like the one common pattern in all three of these places is that the trust in the government and currency is not high.
Yeah, I mean, there's like many kinds of rug pulling, right? Your currency can get devalued by 3x. You could get your PayPal accounts could get locked and your money frozen for 180 days without interest. You could, get deplatformed off Twitter and have no recourse. You could have your email account locked and like basically have no way to get it back unless you're like a super privileged person who knows someone who's one hop away from a top level, employee at one of these companies. Like this is actually another one of those weird things. Like people often, I think, like make this argument that like, oh, centralized stuff like has good accounts recovery and is good in practice if you screw up. But like, it's surprising to what extent that's not true, right? Like I've personally had to go and, use, my contacts and help unlock people's accounts at these weird, Silicon Valley companies. And, it's, okay, it's fine. Like, a few, 1,000 people around the world have, that level of privilege. But, how, what about everyone else, right? And, I honestly believe that, social recovery, as I've been shilling for the last 5 years, is, a better and more reliable form of recovery than anything that these centralized people offer, right? And but the problem is that we actually have to build it and go make it available for people. And so that's one of the things that's okay.
So one common point that usually comes up when at least I'm having some of these conversations is well, most people are not getting banned and deplatformed, and it only applies to a very small chunk of the population. How do you kind of contrast that as an argument, and why is that still not a good defense for people saying nothing has to be decentralized?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that, there's definitely some communities where that happens very rarely, and then there's other communities where that sort of stuff just happens all the time, and it's just a part of.
I mean, if you're in crypto as a company and you're using a platform specifically MailChimp for emails, you just get insta deplatformed and you have no other option, and that's a very
totally exactly that sort of stuff. I think happens to me when I think more than once this year. It's totally a thing. It's and then the other thing is just even if you personally are not the one getting targeted, a lot of the time, you and the values that you care about are being protected by other people who are very vulnerable to this sort of thing. So yeah, I think having a neutral infrastructure that can't be easily turned against particular people or particular groups of people is just really important.
And that applies to non-financial applications equally.
Exactly. It applies to both non-financial applications and financial applications. It applies across the entire world, I think, even more than it applies to wealthy countries, but I think it applies to some extent in wealthy countries too.
So you talked about social recovery and that you've been talking about it for 5 years. Well, it's 2023. Why haven't we seen that in masses?
So for social recovery wallets in particular, there's a lot of UX challenges to getting them properly rolled out, right? This is very subtle, right? So first, the reason why ERC 4337 needs to exist, right? Basically,
which is a kind of abstraction for people.
Exactly. So the type of wallet that most people use today, it's called an EOA, an externally owned account. It's a wallet that is controlled by one private key, right? So you have one private key, one 32 byte number, and
You're copying your 12 secret words.
exactly right. And this is like one number that if you lose it, your account goes bye-bye. If someone else sees it, then they grab your assets and your assets go bye-bye, right? And it's like actually not very good security. And then I think people for the last 5 years have been, like the dog in the meme, like basically say, like, mentioning hardware wallets and, saying this is fine. But then we hear scandals involving hardware wallets once every couple of years. And
unanimously, everybody's affected with a single point of failure.
Yeah, exactly. And I basically think, the only sensible future that makes sense, especially when we're talking about something as serious as holding someone's identity and their life savings, is some kind of multi-sig solution that involves stuff that's not just controlled by you, right? I personally, have most of my money in a multi-sig wallet, and I would not trust it any other way, right? Like, I would literally not trust a system where I had all of the keys.
That's the $5 rent attack.
Yeah, exactly. Just like all kinds of attacks, right? And so the problem with these smart contract wallets, right, is that an EOA is just something that you can use by yourself, right? If you want to have multiple keys, then you need to have a smart contract to actually implement those rules. Now, if you have a smart contract implementing those rules, then your funds have to be stored in a smart contract. But then there's a problem. Who pays for gas? In Ethereum, with the current Ethereum rules, a transaction has to start from an EOA, and that EOA has to pay gas. Therefore, if you use a smart contract wallet, you need to have your money in your smart contract wallet. You also need to have some amount of money in your EOA to be able to pay the gas. You have to have logic for constantly refreshing that EOA. You have to pay an extra 21,000 gas to verify the part of the transaction that just is going into the EOA, and then separately pay for the logic of verifying the smart contract over here. Right? It just gets very complicated. You need all of this extra weird stuff happening. And ERC-4337 is trying to basically streamline all of that, reduce the gas cost of that as much as possible, and make the experience of having a smart contract wallet basically the same as the experience of an EOA. And theoretically it works, but so there's this thing called ERC-1271, right? Basically, a lot of applications that DeFi apps, a lot of other kinds of apps, they depend on users being able to make signatures, right? And so you sign not just transactions, you also sign messages off-chain, right? And signing messages off-chain is often valuable. A lot CowSwap uses it, lots of applications use it. But the problem is that just the kind of signing that they use is EOA only, right? And what EIP 1271 does is it defines a way for smart contract wallets to be able to sign not just user operations, but also the word for kind of the equivalent of transactions, but also off-chain messages. The problem is lots of dApps don't support ERC 1271, right? In my opinion, lots and lots of dApps are just doing a terrible job of being standards compliant. Lots of dApps are MetaMask only, de facto. You try to use them from inside of Brave or the status wallet or anything else, they just break. Come on, guys, shame, right? Lots of dApps don't support ERC 1271, more shame, right? Some dApps even use checking that the code of an account is empty, so checking that an account is an EOA as a proof that this is something that's allowed to use it, right? Triple shame, this there's just so much stuff that within the application ecosystem that is just totally not realizing what the smart contract reality is going to be. And this is one of the reasons why I've told a lot of other people that the remaining challenges are not technical challenges, they're social coordination challenges, right? They're zero-knowledge proofs exist, smart contract wallets exist, formal verification exists, right? ZK EVMs exist. The main challenge at this point is just getting all of the pieces fit together in ways so that it actually makes sense for people and it's actually usable by people.
So it's not specifically communicating that, it's more about actually, in this place, standard compliance, at least so that...
Standards compliance, I think, we need more people somehow, kicking all of in the butts, like all of these developers of applications that like are not even trying to be standards compliant. That's another hackathon project, an equivalent for L2Beat, but like a website that like names and shames applications that are not standards compliant.
One other kind of question I have is, well, it seems like we're obviously moving to a multi-chain world.
Right.
How do you make this more consistent now when people have anywhere from multiple wallets to the same address on multiple chains? Like, what's kind of missing, or what are the complications there, and what are some potential solutions for this?
Right. So this is these are the ideas that I was thinking about when I wrote that post on the 3 transitions a couple of weeks ago. Right. Basically, that like it's obvious to everyone that in order to have like affordable transaction fees, we have to make things work on layer 2s, right? It's obvious to increasingly everyone that EOAs are not acceptable, and we need to have smart contract wallets if we want to have wallet security, especially for not super technical users, right? Who here would trust their grandma to safely hold $3 million in an EOA?
I want to point out that 0 hands have been raised for the video.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Who here still uses an EOA? Right. I mean, for me, fortunately, the EOAs hold less than 3% of my money, but, I want to improve on that too. By the way, this is another thing, right? Even if you need to, like, have the cold wallet, hot wallet separation is, like, really, like, useful, right? Like, the money that you need to use, like, fine, stick it in whatever is convenient. The money that is your life savings, stick it in a safe, like a Gnosis Safe wallet, right? Who here uses, Gnosis Safe?
There's a lot of hands. That's great.
Perfect. This is good. Who here uses a Gnosis Safe wallet that has more than 3 participants in it, and that has a threshold of at least 3? This is good, right?
That's good.
Yeah, see, so, like, this is, like, very much improved compared to a few years ago, right? So, like, this is amazing. We're making progress, right? Like, like, to me, I think, like, fees and safety are roughly equally important, because if you just think about, like, what is the total amount of money that people have lost to fees being way too high, it's like over $1 billion. And then if you look at the amount of money that people have lost to all kinds of hacks, it's like also over $1 billion, right?
Oh, significantly more.
Right, exactly. So it's look, both of these things are a big deal, right? And it's I think really really important to solve both of them, right? But the challenge is, like, if you try to do both together, right? So there's this concept called a counterfactual address, right? So when you receive your ETH for the first time, who here remembers when they received ETH for the first time? Right, buddy. When you received ETH for the first time, you received it to an Ethereum address. You were able to get your money into an Ethereum address without having already registered that Ethereum address on chain, right? Why? Well, because to register an address on chain, you needed to have already sent a transaction, which already required paying transaction fees, which required already having ETH, right? So the first ETH you receive has to go into an address that is generated off-chain without some kind of on-chain registration process, right? Get that? Okay. So then this is very easy for EOAs, right? Because for in an EOA, the address is just a hash of the public key. Now, in a layer 2 world, you have many of these addresses. You have an address on every one of these L2s, right? So who here has used Polygon ZK EVM so far? Okay. Some of you have probably received weird airdrop tokens on Polygon ZK EVM without even having access to system, right? Now, you are able to retrieve those tokens later if you want to. Why? Because the address is the same on every chain, and so you can use those same keys and you can go and access them later, even if you have not interacted with Polygon before. Now, here is a challenge with social recovery wallets. Let's say you have a social recovery wallet, and
which are not EOAs in this example.
Which are what?
Which are not EOAs.
Right, which are not EOAs. They have to be smart contracts. And then let's say you initialize your social recovery wallet on Ethereum mainnet, and you also initialize it on zk Sync, right? then what happens? Let's say months go by, years go by. At some point, you lose your key. You have to reset your key. Okay, fine. You reset it on mainnet. You reset it on zk sync. And then you realize, oh wait, you received a really huge payment, but someone sent it to you on Optimism. You go and see, can you access it? Oh wait, you have not yet initialized your account on Optimism, and you can initialize your account with Create2 because of the address, but oh wait, the address depends on the initial key and not the current key, and so you don't have the initial key anymore, and so you're screwed, right? So the problem is, like, basically, these kinds of issues, they're intersectional, right? They only appear when you have scaling and you have smart contract wallets at the same time. Now, in my posts, like in both of my last two posts, I talk a lot about architectures that can try to solve this problem, architectures that can try to let you have your funds across many different L2s but at the same time, like, make it practical for upgrading to happen, make it practical for key changes to happen, and to, like, solve for this counterfactual address problem. But it's, like, still...
Yeah, but it requires everybody to opt in.
Exactly. Like, this stuff requires people to actually build the technology, right? And then if we talk about privacy, like, when I ask people, would you be comfortable holding most of your wealth on a multisig where your keys are owned by your friends, right? Or family members. Look, when asked so far, the biggest answer for why not has been privacy, right? It's like, okay, maybe you trust your mom not to, go and discover the 4 other people that you put on your multisig and manage to find them without tipping you off and work with them to steal your money. But do you necessarily trust your mom with, or do you necessarily want your mom to be able to snoop on all your transactions, right? Like, that's a more, like, that's like a type of trust for your family members that a lot of people don't have, right? So it turns out that there are ways to use cryptography to do social recovery in such a way that your mom is guarding your account, but your mom does not have to see what all of your addresses are, right? And, like, this is doable. It requires fancier cryptography, but it's a challenge. It has to be implemented, right? And this is, like, again, it's like intersectional, right? Like, this is an issue that only comes up if you care about having privacy and you care about having social recovery at the same time, right? And so we have to, like, really think about all of these things as an ecosystem and think about these things holistically, which is why, like, I think what we need is not like isolated teams working on individual parts of the problem is not enough, right? We need, like, much higher amounts of coordination between different layers of the ecosystem to, like, really try to solve all of these problems and work together and, like, really make them work in, like, an actually existing community.
Actually, I was going to do a follow-up, but I think we should change topics. I want to talk about some other things that have been happening that are not related to scaling. So I think everybody who applied here, we kind of asked you a question on what is it that you want to see and why you're excited about this space. And a lot of, everybody filled out that answer. I read through all of them. And there's a really interesting pattern because everybody who was not coming here from the hackathon side really kind of wanted to see and be at this event because they wanted to learn what they can use blockchains for and what are the applications. And this is an interesting theme because for the last 6 years, we've constantly been talking about these things and we kind of tell people about this, what you can do as a developer, all the financial and interesting applications, whether it's DAOs, NFTs, what have you. All those things are things that we see, but they don't apply to everybody day to day. And one kind of interesting thing that we noticed as like a side effect was that effectively the common theme in all those communities that we've seen, whether it's DAOs, different NFT communities, ETH Global hackathons, is that they are effectively bringing a small group of people together that share certain interests and effectively using Web3 and cryptocurrencies to come together. And that is an application in my definition. I'm not sure if you agree that community forms around these interest groups. And that kind of was like, oh, this is interesting as an observation. And then it just occurred to me that you also, in a way, tested this theory live with Zuzulu. So for those of you who don't know what this is, I'd love for you to tell people about what the experiment was and what the initial goals were and how did things turn out.
Yeah, so like basically Zuzulu was this social experiment in trying to like basically see like what is a kind of like practical, actually implementable version of this whole crypto cities, like, network state, coordinations, that kind of concept of actually is, right? Of like trying to like bring people together in physical space.
So what is a network state for the audience?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's almost better to not answer that question because lots of people have different.
You have like a polarizing.
Yeah, like it's like so. Well, I think like what the cluster of ideas is basically this cluster of like, can we take existing online communities and bring people together in physical space and create online or offline communities that are able to be in physical space, benefit from like just being in an environment where people can interact with other people who have similar interests and values, benefit from some kind of network effects and ability to collectively organize around like specific things that community cares about collectively, but that like existing governments like don't even think to provide because it's because it's a niche interest, right?
So it has to be tied into potentially having different rules and laws around how government settings.
Yeah, or like even like simple things like if you have a community that cares about healthy food, like you try really hard to kind of collectively work to make healthy food very available and with like lots of varieties in a very small radius, right? If we care about like privacy, then like actually go and like basically make it a norm in the community that like privacy preserving technology is the default, and like sorry if we catch you using Google Docs 3 times, you're kicked out forever. Like really kind of create the network effects to kind of push for the technology and the knowledge around the technology to kind of work inside the community, right? And so the idea here is to basically take 200 people, bring them into Montenegro, and basically it's a combination of the Ethereum community, some longevity researchers, people who are just enthusiasts about the concept of communities and governance in general, and stay for 2 months and like basically just like be a pop-up city, right? So the goal of the idea here is like people have met, like 200 people person events have happened before, right? But they're called conferences. Conferences only last a week. Things lasting 2 months or even years have existed before. They're called hacker houses. But hacker houses only have 10 people. Right. But then, but something with 200 people and the last 2 months, like that's like a step in a kind of fundamental, like a different direction, right? And like obviously universities exist and cities and countries exist, but like this is like taking something new and like putting it into that level, right? And like it's a significant step up enough that like you actually learn things that you would not have learned from smaller formats, but it's still like small enough that it's practical and manageable, right? And so like we actually did this experiment, and there were a lot of these different interesting subcomponents to it. So there was this very strong health culture. We basically worked with one of the restaurants, and we basically got them to offer this healthy, vegan breakfast menu that was inspired by the Brian Johnson menu, who was this.
You've seen him on news he's the guy who spends $2 million a year to keep his health.
Exactly.
That's the guy.
Right, like one of these, very deep, gurus who basically reorganizes his life around being healthy. And like one of the experiments here is like, can we create a version of, him and his beliefs and his ideas that don't require you to spend huge amounts of money and sink your entire life into it, right? And like we basically, created this, vegan breakfast buffet that was inspired by, that was as much of his menu as we could practically implement on a budget of $15 a day that was compatible with what could be realistically shipped to Montenegro. And like it worked pretty well and people actually liked it, right? And then there were other things, like there was a lot of hiking and running happening. There were these, daily cold plunges that a bunch of people participated in. There's, and like that side of the culture like actually worked. And then on the crypto side, there was this app that got developed. It was called ZooPass. I can actually show it right now. Hold on, sorry. Just
let the camera zoom in.
Yeah, well,
just load it up.
Well, let it says, yeah. So just switching to a different profile on my Graphene OS here. Then okay, click ZooPass, and then it loads, and hopefully the internet here works. So this is a QR code. This QR code contains a zero-knowledge proof. So like this is literally a snark that proves that I am a member of the Zuzulu resident group without revealing which of the members I am, right? So one of the use cases of this that you can think about are, like, if you think of GovTech, right? Like, governments are thinking like a lot about how to digitize. And one of the challenges with this, with this whole digitization process is like, it basically, the way that it ends up being developed by default, it ends up being like a total disaster in terms of privacy at the same time, right? Like, you have CBDCs and this like desire by, like some basically, international elites to try to push people into a cashless society.
Somehow it always boils down to seeing your face and having a camera recognize you.
You have your cameras everywhere, basically, move to this cashless approach that just completely removes a type of privacy that has been a basic part of human civilization for thousands of years, right? If you look at like all of these new uses of needing digital QR codes to like access things in person, and there's just like huge amounts of tracking that become enabled by that, right? And like forms of privacy that have existed for thousands of years are just becoming gone within a decade, right? And what you can do with this kind of technology is you can give people the kind of access control guarantees that people are looking for. Right, so like we use this QR code, for example, just to like gate access to some of the events that were happening, especially when there were just like too many people and lots of people coming in from the outside, and there were limited seats. And we did this by using these QR codes, and so that ended up not actually compromising people's privacy, right? There are also use cases of this online, right? So you can use your ZooPass to log into things, and so there was a system called ZooPoll where you can log in with ZooPass, and so you can prove to the system that you are a Zuzulu resident without proving which resident you are, and you could go vote on things, right? This was like an actual, secure digital voting system that preserved people's identities. Most voting people preserved the privacy of people's identities, and at the same time preserved the property that,
you can track who it is.
Well, no, you can't track who it is. You can track the fact that each resident only voted once, and you can track that the Kremlin did not vote 58,424 times.
Yeah, why are the polls 140% in favor?
Exactly, right? Yeah, so, unfortunately, the 146% are not welcome in these polls. And so, basically we use Zuzulu as like a testing ground for this kind of technology. And like it actually worked, right? Like there were a huge amount of user experience hiccups, but like over the course of a month of like active usage within a community, we managed to actually solve all of those hiccups, made the user experience much more seamless. The zero knowledge proving became like 5 times faster. Everything became much better. And it turned into this technology that like now realistically can be applied in like all kinds of other events and conferences, right? So like I absolutely think that like for future each global events, like, if you need access control, you could like literally, use like, ZooPass QR code tech instead of, requiring
Absolutely.
things that's much more, that like reveals much more about your identity, right? Like you can, and then there's this concept called, within ZooPoll called stamps. So I can show this again, right? So if you scroll down, you see there's a bunch of these stamps, and I can click on these, and there's one thing called Team Cat, and see there's a stamp verifying that I'm on Team Cat. And like stamps are basically like popes, except the difference is that you can prove that you have a stamp, or you can prove like any arbitrary function over those stamps without revealing which specific stamps you have, right? Or even without revealing who you are, right? So like if you want to make your own local party that's like only accessible to people from Team Cat, or you're trying to like
any sort of access control.
Exactly. You want to have your online forum where only people who like actually participated in events of having to do with Zuzulu history can participate in, because you don't want people from the rival I don't know what
The dog lovers.
what's a good name for a rival tribe? I don't know, Solana Village, whatever. You don't want people from Solana Village sneaking in. Then like you can do access control and at the same time keep the thing private, right? So I think the point is that like you can actually try all of these things inside of a kind of community that's like deeply dedicated to particular values, and like you can actually reinforce the values and reinforce the technology a lot of time, like at the same time, and just make a huge amount of progress. And at the same time, like the other thing that I wanted to experiment on is just this fact that like where the network effect is, like just like what physical location the network effect is, like that's not something that we need to kind of surrender to as a fact of life. Like that's something that we can choose, right? Like if like all of the stuff is happening in New York, but as it turns out, New York is part of the United States, and the United States has an immigration policy that's not accessible to a huge number of people, then like, well, guess what? We can like go choose as a community, and like we can go make a hub somewhere else.
And we did that all throughout COVID.
Yeah. And like, I think that's something that like really is good for empowering communities, and especially good for empowering, communities that are global, right? And like that kind of coordination is something that I think itself was part of the experiment. And like, it's something that, I hope that we start seeing more versions of, happening in the future. So, one experiment of many, but generally, I hope that we can do, more cool things and, scale this sort of stuff up and make it, more valuable in the future.
Absolutely. And I think with just how connected everybody is and how we're making it seamless to transact to across borders, pop-up cities are going to be a pretty big norm. So the last question I want to ask before we kind of end this is, we kind of talked about the reflecting on the last 10 years, but in terms of kind of what the next 10 years look like, what kind of do you think are some active themes or things you want to see from the culture of this Ethereum ecosystem embodied?
Yeah, I think one of the things is I think it's important to just like take culture and values more seriously, right? So one of the stories that I think about is if you think about the history of Ubuntu, like the Linux distribution over the last 20 years, right? Like one of the things, like basically the theory there was that, you had Linux, and Linux was like this toy that, it was very deep and very valuable tech, but from the outside point of view, it was this toy that basically appealed to computer geeks, right? But then people tried to create Ubuntu, and the theory of Ubuntu is, okay, we're going to be pragmatic and we're going to make some compromises. But at the same time, the upside of this is that we'll make something that's usable by average people, and we're going to try to like push all of these open like stuff into the background and just make it be an operating system, and then we're going to make the best desktop, and we're going to like actually beat Windows and Mac. This ended up not happening, and as a result, basically they had neither the values nor the mass adoption, right? And I think there's parts of the crypto space that
you went back to being more CLI default because that's when people just took convenience and took the GUI out.
Right. And like, I often worry that, within the crypto space, we end up falling into a similar trap, right? It's like we mainstream crypto, but then crypto is all done inside of centralized exchanges. We mainstream NFTs, but then NFTs are all being run inside of centralized platforms where there are like these, really high, fee references stores, and like, there's not that much actual openness happening, and this is that's not the kind of crypto world that like I actually want to see, right? And like the kind of crypto world that makes sense is one where we actually take decentralization seriously. We take seriously the idea that we're trying to build systems where you can't get rug pulled. We take seriously the idea that we're trying to build systems where if the original operators disappear, the code is open source, not even shared source, open source, and where it can actually be freely copied by other people, where those other people can go and they can start maintaining a system from there, and they can pick up the slack, right? And so you as a user, like even if the original operators of the system disappear, you as a user are still fine, right? And you as a user can still continue. Take seriously the fact that we want to build systems where people do actually, have privacy, and this inevitable transition to digitization that society is going through does not at the same time become a transition where we basically surrender, all of our rights and control to a very small number of centralized organizations. Take seriously the fact that we're trying to build an ecosystem that values collaboration and openness and that values people working together with each other and building tools that work together instead of building empires that try to conquer everything and end up standing apart and fighting, right? And I think like keeping this whole spirit alive is something that's like very important for the space to have meaning, but I think it's also very important for the space to be successful, right? Like if we don't have collaboration and standardization for the 3 transitions that I talked about, then like it's not going to happen and we're going to have like 14 incompatible standards, right? If we, don't have collaboration on, getting privacy systems adopted and figuring out like, what version of that can be legitimized, including by exchanges that have regulatory concerns, then, we're going to have a system where that technology is going to be much less meaningful, right? If we have a system where like we keep working on a small number of applications, but we don't actually, nothing ever actually gets that far because we never actually beat the network effect barrier, then like we're not actually successful, right? And so, we need to like actually work on making all of those things happen.
I think that's a wonderful note to end this on. Vitalik, thank you so much for being here today. So for our very first keynote for Fireside Chat for today, I want to bring on Vitalik, the co-founder of Ethereum and Bitcoin Magazine, to tell you more. And we're going to have a lot of discussions around how things have changed and some things that have not changed. So welcome.
Is it?
I think so.
Okay, good. Mics often don't work. You have to check.
That is actually true. I don't know if people caught that, but that happened with me as soon as I started talking on stage. It's working. All right. Well, there's a lot of things I want to talk to you today about. And for the audience, we're going to shape this conversation in 3 parts. We're going to reflect on how things kind of started and summarize if things are meeting expectation. We're going to talk about what's next, which is a lot of how do we actually still solve some hard problems that we have in this space, especially around scaling. And then the third category is just various. There's a lot of things I'm curious about. Now, I want to not always talk about Ethereum, and we'll kind of go into some of those things too. And let's get started. So I'll keep it easy for the very first question. And let's go talk about scaling directly. So what even is a rollup?
Okay, so a rollup is what we call a layer 2 protocol that sits on top of Ethereum. And what it does is it basically creates this environment within which you can do all of the same things that you can do inside of Ethereum, except all of the computation and most of the data is put off-chain, right? But at the same time, the rollup benefits from being protected by the security of Ethereum, right? So you have a system which uses Ethereum only a small amount, just as a space to put proofs and as a space to put a small portion of data that's actually needed to verify the proofs and that's needed to be able to join the rollup. But otherwise, you basically have like an Ethereum-like environment where everything else is being done off-chain. And the benefit of this is that it can be much cheaper than what we call the Ethereum layer 1, while being basically just as secure at the same time.
That was a good intro. Let's dig in a bit deeper. There's a lot of chatter around technicalities around what defines a rollup. You said a lot of things are off-chain and you kind of keep proofs there.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you personally define the integrity of what is considered valuable data?
Okay. So this is, I guess, a good time to go into kind of the taxonomy of everything that's not L1 that, claims to be part of Ethereum land, whether for marketing reasons or otherwise. Okay, so first you have rollups, right? The key property of a rollup is that even if all of the existing actors in the rollup disappear, any new actors can come in and join, and they can basically keep going. Even if all of the existing actors, except for you as a user inside the rollup, become dishonest, you can still do something that basically, like, possibly with your action or possibly by default, like, they're not going to be able to win. They're not going to be able to steal your money. They're not going to be able to freeze your money. Like, basically, you can, as an individual, can force the rollup to still continue acting correctly and continue working the way that it's supposed to work.
And this statement applies for both ZK rollups and optimistic?
ZK and optimistic. Optimistic requires you as that one good user to submit a fraud proof. In a ZK rollup, they're not able to submit invalid stuff in the first place because they can't submit a valid proof. So rollups, and in order to do this, rollups have to put not just the proofs, but also some amount of data on chain, some amount of data per transaction. And the reason they have to do this is so that if all of the existing actors disappear, a new actor who wants to join the rollup and start participating, they can actually kind of, sync the state of the rollup. They can actually understand, like, what happened before, what are the balances that people have, so that they actually have the information to build things on top and keep going. So rollups are the gold standard. Now, within rollups, there is this stage classification between stage 0, stage 1, and stage 2. And I mean, actually, L2Beat is, like, if you go to l2beat.com, they, like, have a classification for this. I mean, there are, like, a couple of details that I'm still talking about them with, like, they're current, I personally think the threshold for the upgrade council should be, or for the emergency council should be, like, much higher than it currently is, but otherwise, like, it's still a very good resource. It's the short definition of the 3 stages is that stage 2 is, like, a fully secured rollup that has all of the properties that I just said. On the other side, a stage 0 rollup is just a thing that is on the path to being a rollup and that has some, like, very basic stuff. Like, there is open source software that lets you, like, follow along the chain and track what's going on. It calls itself a rollup. It has basic levels of censorship resistance. It's like something that's on the path to being a full rollup, but it's, there's still a lot of pieces that have not been developed, but, like, some pieces that are.
Do sidechains fit that definition, or?
Sidechains do not, right? So for something to be a stage 0 rollup, it has to have an intent to be a rollup, and it has to already have the data on chain. Stage 1 is like this halfway house where basically you can think of it as the zero knowledge proof or the fraud proof system has half the votes, and there is this security council that has the other half of the votes. And so if there's, like, a large supermajority on the security council, then they can overturn what the fraud proof system says. And the purpose of this is to, like, be some training wheels in case the fraud proof system still has some bugs, right? But otherwise, like, it's basically functioning. It is a rollup. You just, like, don't trust the fraud proof or zero knowledge proof system quite enough yet, right? And so the requirements are Security Council has to have a minimum of 8 participants. I mean, my view is that the threshold should be at least 3/4, but this is, like, one of those things that's being debated. Like, the reason why 50% is not enough, right, is because if you have 50%, then, like, basically the majority of this council can just push the outcome whatever way it wants, and, like,